The sky was calm. Too calm. Then, out of nowhere, an alert screamed across the cockpit. A U.S. Air Force F-16 had been marked for death. Somewhere above the Red Sea, a missile sliced through the silence fired by Houthi rebels who thought they'd found an easy kill. But they were wrong. Dead wrong. What followed wasn't just evasion. It was a masterstroke of survival. A high-G ballet in the sky. And when the smoke cleared, the trap snapped shut. From the decks of American warships, vengeance rose like thunder. Tomahawks launched. Hornets screamed, radar installations vanished in the fire. And watching it all unfold, Commander Rachel Monroe, the sharpest mind in naval intelligence, with a cold stare and a single order: execute. This wasn't retaliation. It was a message etched in steel fire and silence. If you fire on an American pilot, the next thing you'll see is the full fury of the United States Armed Forces. Before we start, let us know where you're watching this video from, and if you enjoy it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. The morning over the Red Sea was still almost unnaturally. So, the sun broke clean across a horizon of endless blue, casting a golden sheen on the wings of a lone U.S. Air Force F-16. Inside the cockpit, Captain Daniel Briggs, a seasoned fighter pilot with more than 1,000 flight hours under his belt, cruised at patrol speed. It was routine. Quiet, predictable. He checked his instruments, scanned the skies, and sipped the silence, like a man who'd seen enough chaos to appreciate calm. Then everything changed. A sudden shriek pierced through the cockpit's stillness. A radar lock, his HUD lit up crimson. Another ping, then another incoming Syed-class missile launched from deep inside Houthi-controlled territory. It was fast, hot, and hunting. Without hesitation, Briggs slammed the stick hard to the right. The jet lurched into a gut-crushing 9G turn. Flares burst from the fuselage in rapid bursts, each one a desperate decoy. The cockpit trembled, sirens screamed, the airframe groaned under pressure. And somewhere in that thin stratosphere between death and defiance, an American pilot danced with the devil at 28,000 feet, alone, outnumbered but not outmatched. Just days before the missile screamed toward Captain Briggs's F-16, the world had watched, some with disbelief, others with simmering rage, as grainy footage surfaced on Telegram. A U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone, charred and tumbling from the sky off the coast of Yemen, had been shot down by Houthi militants. They celebrated it like a football victory, parading the wreckage in front of cameras, boasting about their triumph over American air power. There was no solemnity, no recognition of what that aircraft represented. Just smug grins and shaky video clips posted like trophies in a barbaric digital coliseum. To most Americans, the footage was insulting, but for those who wore the uniform or had loved ones who did it, struck deeper. It wasn't just the loss of equipment. It was the disrespect, the arrogance. The message between the lines was chilling. We can hit you and nothing will happen. But something had shifted. And then came the second act of provocation, far more serious, far more personal. This time it wasn't a drone. This time it was a man. An American pilot, a husband, perhaps a father. A human soul strapped into the seat of a fighter jet, 28,000 feet above a hostile world. The Houthi had crossed a line that until now had been approached but never fully breached. They had fired not at metal and wire, but at blood and breath. The brazenness of the attack spoke volumes. It wasn't just a tactical move. It was a statement, reckless, defiant, dripping with contempt. As if they believed the United States had grown soft, dulled by restraint, slow to respond. As if they believed they could escalate without consequence. As if the pilot in that cockpit was nothing more than another expendable target. But they were wrong. The American people may disagree on many things, but when you endanger one of our own, when you fire upon the very men and women sworn to protect our skies, there is no division, no debate. There is only resolve. What the Houthis mistook for weakness was merely patience, and that patience had just run out. Because now it wasn't about a drone. It was about honor, about deterrence, about the message that must be sent not in speeches or sanctions, but in steel and precision. They hadn't just fired at a jet, they had awakened something far larger. Captain Daniel Briggs was never just flying a routine patrol. What looked like an ordinary surveillance loop over the Red Sea was in fact the final piece in a far more deliberate operation. His F-16 was a pawn. Yes, but a willing one placed precisely where it needed to be, in a chess game most would never see. This wasn't a chance. It was calculated exposure, a play rooted in patience, precision, and one mind pulling the strings from far beyond the horizon. Aboard the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, deep within the steel walls of the Combat Information Center, sat Commander Rachel Monroe. Calm focused a warfighter not with missiles, but with intelligence. Her battlefield was data. Her weapons were satellite feeds, thermal spikes, radar signatures, signal intercepts, and historical patterns. And she had seen it coming. For weeks, Monroe had been tracking the Houthis' growing confidence, their bolder radar pings, their erratic missile tests, the dangerous assumption that the US wouldn't retaliate beyond a statement. She didn't just read signals, she read intentions, and she knew sooner or later they'd take the bait. So she designed a bait and trap strategy rooted in ISR doctrine, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. She knew they wouldn't fire at a drone again. Too easy, too expected. But a lone F-16 seemingly exposed over contested waters, that was temptation, and temptation was a vulnerability. Briggs wasn't left alone by accident. He was given just enough room to appear vulnerable, while the real protection lurked beyond radar reach. Triton drones flew silently at 60,000 feet, capturing every flicker on the ground. EA-18G Growlers ran quiet, jamming loops in the distance. And back in the CIC, Monroe's team watched it all. Every emission, every pulse, every reckless mistake. When the missile was launched, she didn't flinch. She'd expected it. When the radar stayed active just a minute too long, her voice was steady. We have a lock. Confirmed site. Prepare retaliation coordinates. There was pride in her work, but never ego. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was defending the doctrine. The art of deterrence doesn't always rest in the trigger. It rests in the trap. And Rachel Monroe had just closed hers. In that moment, American strategy wasn't just reactive. It was prophetic. The enemy thought they'd caught us off guard. But in reality, they had wandered blind and bold into the jaws of a far greater force, one that had been waiting, watching, and ready. The moment Captain Briggs pulled out of that brutal 9G turn, his hands steady despite the pressure still crushing his chest, the radar warning receiver screamed again. Not one, but multiple pings. A staggered burst, more missiles, more launch points, and from different angles. The Houthi weren't retreating, they were doubling down. If you're watching this while on the go, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications if you haven't already. Inside the F-16 cockpit, alarms flashed red. The air around the jet boiled with tension, but Briggs had no time to think, only to act. His countermeasure system went hot again. More flares burst from behind the aircraft like burning petals against the sky. He dipped the nose and dove hard, slicing through air thick with danger. But this wasn't just a pilot dodging death anymore. This was a battlefield expanding by the second D, and far above it, unseen by the Houthis, an invisible web had already closed in. At 60,000 feet, a Navy MQ-4C Triton drone tracked every heat signature and radar pulse. Circling in silent loops, it watched the missile trails bloom from the earth like fiery thorns. Elsewhere, an E-2D Hawkeye spun in Overwatch its dish, painting a live map across hundreds of miles. Aboard a nearby destroyer, an EA-18G Growler began its run, pouring broadband, jamming into the air, scrambling enemy radar with bursts of invisible fury. Back on the Eisenhower, Commander Rachel Monroe stood over a console pulsing with data. Her eyes didn't blink, her voice low and precise. We've got them. Launcher stayed hot. No relocation, target locked. She turned to her fire control officer and added, colder than steel. They just signed their death warrant. This wasn't rage. This wasn't revenge. This was justice measured in coordinates and countdowns. Monroe wasn't seeking a fight. She was executing a doctrine. If you light up US aircraft with hostile radar and fire, You're no longer a shadow in the sand, you're a target. A known fixed-tracked piece of battlefield data. And in modern warfare, that's a fatal status to hold. What the Houthi operators failed to understand was simple. Every second their launchers remained exposed. Every pulse from their tracking radar. Every pixel of thermal activity they weren't hunting. They were being hunted. From the CIC, Monroe gave the nod. Target packages confirmed strike clock ticking. And though the air outside was still thick with threat, the war had already shifted in one decisive breath from defense to punishment. There was no hesitation, no drawn-out deliberation, no second-guessing. When the final confirmation hit the Eisenhower's Combat Information Center, the response was swift and absolute. The order echoed with calm finality across the room. Package Bravo. Execute. That phrase, just 2 words, unleashed the might of the United States Navy. On the deck of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, gliding silently 100 miles off the Yemeni coast, steel canisters slid open like the petals of a mechanical flower. Inside, Tomahawk cruise missiles coiled and ready. Then ignition, a low roar. One by one the missiles launched, climbing with slow-burning fury into the night sky. No spectacle, no drama, just controlled, calculated destruction, slipping quietly into the stars. 70 miles away aboard the USS Truman, the flight deck roared to life. Catapult steam hissed beneath booted feet. Red shirts armed the birds with deadly precision. GBU-38 JDAMs, AGM-88 HARM missiles. Green shirts refueled the jets, hands moving like clockwork. Yellow shirts directed Super Hornets into position with hand signals lit by red battle lamps. The air smelled of jet fuel and salt and steel. It was the scent of discipline, of power restrained until now. In the CIC, Commander Rachel Monroe stood like a conductor before an orchestra of war. Dozens of data streams flowed into her station's satellite imagery. Thermal overlays, radar signatures, drone telemetry. Her fingers moved across the control panel with fluid confidence. She wasn't just watching, she was guiding. The strike wasn't random. It was layered, synchronized, beautiful in its deadliness. Tomahawks were already on their way to neutralize hardened targets. The Growlers would launch next, jamming enemy comms, blinding radar and disrupting coordination. Then came the hammers. The Super Hornets loaded to the teeth and running silent until the final drop. Rachel called the sequence Viper 1 Green Eagle 2. Green Ghost Flight Weapons, Hot Strike Pattern Alpha. Her tone never wavered. Not once. Because this wasn't a reaction. It was orchestration. For every insult, for every missile fired at an American pilot, a reckoning had arrived. Not loud, not reckless, but methodical, relentless, righteous. And in that moment, watching American warfighters rise from sea and sky with precision forged by decades of doctrine, there was a collective feeling shared by every soul in that command room, and far beyond it. Pride unshakable, justified pride. The night sky over Yemen lit up like a storm with no thunder. The first Tomahawk struck just before 2:12 a.m., its warhead slamming into a radar trailer tucked behind a dry riverbed. 1 second, it was emitting a defiant pulse trying to track American aircraft. The next, it was gone. Flames rose from the desert floor, casting long, flickering shadows over terrain that had dared to challenge U.S. air superiority. Moments later, 2 more missiles followed their precision. Flawless, one found a mobile command vehicle. Its chassis flipped, shrapnel scattering across the sand like broken teeth. The other hit a suspected ammo depot. The resulting explosion didn't just confirm the strike, it roared. Fireballs surged into the air, igniting secondary blasts. Ammunition cooked off. Fuel tanks burst. It was a chain reaction of chaos, and it was just the opening salvo. High above it all, 4 FA-18 Super Hornets descended silently from 20,000 feet. Their payloads were already armed. GBU-38 JDAMs, smart bombs designed to seek out hardened positions and erase them without mercy. One by one, they released their ordnance. The bombs fell like whispers and landed like thunder. Deep beneath a rock face near the coast, A camouflaged bunker housing enemy command personnel ceased to exist. Concrete fractured earth rose, and silence returned deadly final. But it wasn't over yet. On the far ridge, a Houthi radar unit had gone active, perhaps in desperation, perhaps in defiance. It pinged once. That was all the harm missile needed. Within seconds, it locked onto the emission like a bloodhound. The missile streaked across the sky and struck with merciless precision. The blast was surgical, the message unmistakable. If you're watching this while on the go, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications if you haven't already. Inside the Combat Information Center aboard the Eisenhower, Rachel Monroe watched it all unfold in real time. Thermal imagery turned red, then white-hot faded to ash. Her voice came low through her headset, not for dramatics, but as a statement of record, as if carved in stone. Target Alpha neutralized. God help the next one who tries. And in that moment, those who watched, whether from the flight deck, the drone feed, or a command terminal, half a world away, felt something deep in their chest. Not vengeance, not cruelty, but awe. Awe at the discipline, awe at the reach, and awe at the quiet, cold finality of a military that, when pushed, doesn't just respond. It erases above the Red Sea. Captain Daniel Briggs held formation in the pale light of early dawn. His jet, scarred by the strain of evasive maneuvers, now glided in eerie silence. Beside him, another F-16 pulled into position. Silent confirmation that the sky was theirs again. No chatter, no cheers, just the low hum of engines and the unspoken bond of men who had flown through fire and made it out the other side. Below them, the battlefield no longer moved. The desert that had moments ago erupted with fire and force now lay still, littered with twisted steel, cratered sand, and columns of smoke rising like ghostly warnings into the morning air. What was once a web of radar and launchers was now nothing but smoldering wreckage. From the Eisenhower's Combat Information Center, the voice came over comms. Flat, efficient final strike, confirmed RTB returned to base. The mission was done, but no one clapped. No one smiled. This wasn't a victory in the cinematic sense. It was a necessity. A surgical lesson delivered in steel and silence. Commander Rachel Monroe stood alone in the glow of a dozen monitors. The thermal imaging screen faded from white-hot to cold black. No more movement, no more signals, just quiet. She didn't blink. She didn't exhale. She just stared a moment longer, as if burning the image into her memory, and then turned from the screen. They thought it was a fighter jet, she said softly to no one in particular, her voice barely louder than a breath. What they hit was the doctrine of deterrence. In that sentence lay the weight of everything. This wasn't about retaliation. It wasn't even about vengeance. It was about principle, about the cost of provocation in a world where American restraint is not weakness, but a warning. They had fired at one aircraft, but what they truly struck was a nation's threshold, a line long held now irrevocably crossed. And for every radar operator still watching, every foreign strategist parsing the fallout, every adversary testing the margins, the message was unshakable. America may be quiet, but it is never unprepared. No press conference was held. No headlines were crafted. The United States didn't need to boast. The message had already been delivered in ash, in silence, and with precision. Within hours, satellite images began circulating through the usual channels. Scorched earth shattered radar arrays. Empty command posts reduced to craters. The analysts didn't need context. They knew what they were looking at. The signature was unmistakable. Iran saw it. So did Russia and Beijing. They were watching too closely. What they witnessed was not just American retaliation. It was American recalibration. A shift from restraint to readiness, from reaction to redefinition. This wasn't the old playbook dusted off. This was modern warfare rewritten in real time, with doctrines forged by experience and sharpened by necessity. And perhaps that's the lesson that lingers most, not in what was destroyed, but in how quickly and decisively it happened. A fighter jet was fired upon. A pilot survived, and in less than an hour, an entire network was dismantled. Not in chaos, but in order. Cold, calculated, absolute. So now a question remains. One worth asking, not only of commanders, but of every American who understands what deterrence truly means. If you were in command that night, would you have stopped after the launcher? Or wiped out their entire radar net? Be honest. Be strategic. Because one missile might start a war, but it's what happens next that defines who you are. What we witnessed in this story wasn't just a battle. It was a lesson written in the smoke trails of missiles and the silence that followed. We were reminded that deterrence is not a word, it's a doctrine. It lives in the quiet discipline of men like Captain Briggs and the sharp strategic minds like Commander Rachel Monroe. It's forged not by bravado, but by precision patience and the unwavering will to protect without hesitation. This story teaches us that in a world of escalating threats and reckless actors, America cannot afford to blink. We must remain vigilant, unified, and ready, not because we seek war, but because peace. True peace is protected by strength, by action, and by the courage to draw the line when no one else will. If this mission gave you a deeper respect for those who stand, watch over our skies, do something about it. Like, subscribe, share this story. Let others know that behind every fighter jet is a message, and behind every message is a nation that still stands tall.